Hello, ESIT providers. This is Liz Espinosa Snow and Elena Romani with King County. We're here to do a walkthrough of your core billing spreadsheet to help support you with the new SE changes. I'm going to hand it off to Elena.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. So I'm going to start by doing a walkthrough of how to submit your reporting spreadsheet in the core portal, how to pull down the invoice and complete your actual submission to, and then we'll walk through the different tabs on the invoice and talk through, in particular, the SE payments and what are the different rules for a payment authorization for SE enrollment, for SE payments to be authorized in the system. So we'll start from the core portal. Once you log into the system, if you select this home button here, this is sort of what your home page looks like. I'm logged into the test version of the portal, so things may look slightly different than it does when you're accessing the actual core portal. I'm using a DDEX test provider, so all of the data that you'll see in here is fake data, but just to give you a bit of an example of what it would look like. So on your homepage, you'll see a listing of your different scopes of work. If you have more than one scope of work that reports data into core, you may see more than one listed here. For most of you, though, I believe ESIT is the only scope of work that you have submitting into core, so you may only see your ESIT scope of work here. And the nice thing about the homepage is it already has a link directly to where you would submit your spreadsheet. So when you're ready to do that, you can just click here. And it takes you directly to the Submissions tab for your ESIT scope of work right here. And that's that Submissions tab here. You'll notice there are several others as well, but for the purposes of submitting your reporting spreadsheet, this is the tab that we're most interested in. It'll show you right here what your current reporting period is. So right now it's set to August of 2021. So that's the reporting period we're submitting for now in September 2021 as we're recording this. And you'll see here it lists the file that you can download to fill out and then submit your spreadsheet. So you would click download here. It'll generate your reporting spreadsheet. Sometimes it takes a little bit, and then it'll come down into your download files. If you have a different type of internet browser that you're using, it may not pop up like it does for me, but you can find it in the downloads file on your computer. I already have one opened up, so I'm going to clear out some of these fields here just so we can kind of start fresh. So this is an example of a reporting spreadsheet. Again, these are fake clients or child records that we have in our test system. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see a little bit better. The first column is agency client ID, and so this is the ESIT ID for our ESIT scopes of work. So you would enter in or just confirm these ESIT, that these agency client IDs are reflective of the ESIT ID for those clients. If you ever have any questions about what these fields, how they're defined, you can hover over the headings and you'll see here the definitions that these are giving for each of these fields. So agency client ID is a required field. You'll see in the generated reports any clients that you've previously submitted into core, all of that information pre-fills. So these were all existing clients in the system. If there are any new clients or children that you need to add to your reporting spreadsheet, you would just add the child's name here and their ESIT ID. ADSA ID is typically only filled in for clients or for children who have an active CDS authorization in core. So you don't have to worry about filling in ADSA ID. That will populate as soon as core gets that CDS authorization record for that child, and that information will fill in. So agency client ID, first and last name, middle initial if you have it, date of birth, and then their gender, and this is a drop-down field as well. And then we'll keep scrolling. Gender detail is not a required field, but you can complete it if you'd like to. We know that information is also in the DMS, so it's not vitally important for core. School district is needed, though, so that is also a drop-down. You can select different options here. One question we get often is, what do we do if our school district is not listed here? And there are some options towards the bottom there. Enrollment ID, or enrollment date, rather, is another field that you would need to enter. It's a required field for the reporting spreadsheet to be accepted in core, and this is the initial IFSP date. Residence county ID will pre-fill most of the time when, again, this is a field that we're bringing in through our integration with DCHS's Developmental Disabilities Administration database called AWA. It's where the CDS authorization information comes through. So that would pre-fill, not a required field. So if it's blank, you can leave it. If they have an active CDS authorization, the service from and to date, so the CSA start date and the CSA end date will populate there. Again, you can leave those fields blank. So the next field you really need to worry about is over here under service type. So this is where you would select the response for the type of service that that child received during the reporting period. And your options are face-to-face, coordination, or none if they receive no services. So for these clients, I'm just gonna, to make it easy, choose coordination for all of them. And then these are the two new fields on the reporting spreadsheet as of September 2021 to reflect the changes for the special education or SE payments. So we have this field called first business day of the submission period. So that is the first business day of the month that you're actually submitting that data, also the SE count date. So that's 9/1/2021 for the month that you're submitting right now. And then this SE enrollment verification. So this is going to pre-fill. You don't have to do anything here. SE enrollment verification is where you will need to fill in something. So you'll see when you hover over this, it gives you some good instructions. It says indicate whether the child was still enrolled as of the first business day of the submission period. So that's referring to this column. Were they still enrolled on 9/1/2021, also called first business day of the SE enrollment month. So you would indicate, so if these fields were blank, you would indicate if the client or the child is still enrolled on 9/1/2021. So for the purposes of just providing some different examples for you, we're going to exit this child on 9/1/2021. So we'll say no here. They were no longer enrolled. They exited on that day. And for the rest of the children on this list, we'll say yes. And then there's a notes field as well, if there are any notes that you want to share with program managers or fiscal staff for these clients in particular. So when you're done filling this out, you would just save it again and then go back to the core portal and you're ready to submit your spreadsheet. So you would click submit here and it'll bring you to this page. You select choose file. It'll bring up a window. You'd select the file that you want to upload. If there's any comments that you want to submit about the submission in general, you can fill those in here and then you would click submit. And then CORE is going to go through the process of checking to make sure that all of the information that you've submitted meets any spreadsheet validations. You didn't put a text field in a place where a date is supposed to be, things like that, or that you didn't forget to add an enrollment date for a client, for example, or agency client ID, that there's no duplicate cases, all of those things. So you just kind of hang out on this page and let it process. If you are a larger provider, that may take some time to do, but for the purposes of our training, we're going to pretend it was already accepted. And go ahead and I'll show you how to pull down the invoice. So for invoices, you can go to My Reports up here at the top. And it'll take you to the Reports tab. This one takes a little while to load sometimes. And under Standard Reports, you'll be looking for the ESIT invoice report specifically. When you're ready to run it, and I'll say, as soon as you submit, CORE is doing a lot of calculations behind the scenes, especially for larger providers. So we do typically say, give it about 45 minutes to an hour from the time that you know you've had a successful submission in CORE before you pull down your invoice. Another key thing to keep in mind is that the SE payments are not run right away. That happens a few days after you all submit, and it's a process that's kind of run by the program staff. So the SE payments won't show up in this initial invoice. But whenever you're ready to actually run an invoice, you would select Run Report over here. So not Custom, but Run Report. It'll bring up this pop-up window here. Under Scope of Work, just keep that at all. Reporting period should also be kept at all. And then Program Model, ESIT. For final payment status date, you would select the first day of the month that you're submitting the data. So we're submitting the data, in this case, in September. So we'd say September 1st through September 30th. So that's not the month you're submitting the data for necessarily, but the month that you're actually sending us the data. So we're submitting in the month of September. We're going to put September 1, September 30th. That just makes sure, having that broad range, make sure that you're including any records that program staff in their review or fiscal staff in their review may have changed or edited between the time that you submit your reporting spreadsheet and the time that they finalize an invoice. So once you have those dates in there, you select Run. It's going to process and download the invoice as an Excel file. I already have one open here to share with you all. So the invoice has changed a bit now too, that we have these SC payment changes. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this better, but the first tab really has a lot of detailed information about what's contained in the invoice and how we're defining the different fields that you may see on an invoice. So the Notes tab is the first tab. Zoom in a bit. The first thing that you'll see here, this first section is a description of what each of these tabs mean. So defines kind of what's included on record of approvals, ESIT summary invoice, all of that is included here. Many of these fields already existed in your old invoice for ESIT services, but there are a few new ones that I want to go over today. So the SE payment not authorized detail, this is a new tab that's going to give you client level information about which children are not authorized for SE payment for that month. And then we have another tab, which is the never authorized detail. Similarly, it's a child level report that's showing you what records are never authorized. So this isn't something that happens all that commonly, but since we are at the end or recent end of a state fiscal year, any records from last year that never got authorized will be assigned that never authorized status fairly soon. And so those records will show up on here too, just so that we don't have records continuing on into a new fiscal year. And then we have a variance report. So variance reports, I know, have been included on like fiscal remittance in the past, and we know that's caused some confusion for providers having to look into different places to kind of see where changes are made in your invoices. So we've incorporated this variance report now into your core invoice. And so that's going to show any records that have been manually changed by program staff. So if program managers or fiscal staff have had to change anything about a payment record, either making it authorized now and adding an additional payment, or making a record that was authorized become not authorized or never authorized and remove a payment, that information will show up now on the variance report with an explanation. And then the next section of the Notes tab is just giving you some definitions of other fields that you'll see throughout the invoice report. There are some new additions on here as well. So that SE payment verification, that is the new one of the new fields that you see on your reporting spreadsheet now. So it's just explaining what that field means. We've also added a definition of service month now that we also have a new field for SE enrollment month. So we know this piece can be a bit confusing, but service month is the name of the month in which services were provided. It's also the name of the month for Part C, BSK, and CDS funding. We have another field now on the invoice that's called the SE enrollment month. So that's the name of the month in which SE enrollment count is taken. It's also the name of the payment month for SE billing. So this is going to be different from the reporting period for BSK, Part C, and CDS. So for example, if ESIT services happened in July and the first the first business day of August, the SE enrollment month would be August. So those are some new fields on the invoice. That's our Notes tab. Record of approvals. This is the tab that shows you the status of the invoice essentially. So it's going to list out all of the uploads for which data is being pulled to create this invoice. And we have a note up here that lets you know, how do we know if this invoice is final yet? You'll know it's final if all of the uploads here are approved by the fiscal lead. So fiscal lead approval status is approved for all of the uploads in here, then you know it's final. In this example, it's only approved for one of them. not the other, so it's not a final invoice. And you'll see some new additions up here. We've always had reporting period show up. Now we also have that SE enrollment month. So the reporting period, again, BSK Part C CDS is August 2021, but the SE enrollment month is September 2021. There's been no changes done to the ESIT summary invoice other than adding in here, again, just definitions for what makes an SE payment authorized. So it's these steps here, that the child's enrollment date or their initial IFSP is before the first business day of the SE enrollment month or the monthly count day. The child is not yet 3 years of age on the monthly count day. The child has not exited services by the monthly count day. And the child received ESIT services during the month prior to SE enrollment month, in this case, August. And the child's IFSP was entered into the DCHS data management system by the provider no later than the 10th calendar day of the SE enrollment period. So this tab is going to show you the summary of payments by funding source, so BSK, Part C, CDS, and SE. It'll show you authorized payments first, and then newly authorized payments, which is just CDS. So any records that were waiting from a prior month, now we have an active county service authorization for CDS for this child, and they've become newly authorized. There's some caveats here for the SE data. And then down at the bottom, there's awaiting authorization, AWA authorization. This is just for CDS records, letting you know kind of how many units are waiting for a CDS authorization and an estimation of what that payment would be if the services were authorized. The next tab is payments detail. Again, adding SE enrollment date, definition for SE payments. We've added a few new fields here too, so that you can see the SE enrollment month, like what the SE enrollment month is for those SE payments. So that's only going to populate if the DDEX service type is SE. And then also pulling in kind of what you put on the reporting spreadsheet for SE enrollment verification. You said yes for this one. And you can see this is an authorized SE payment here with the dual allocation amount. Newly authorized, no major changes here either. Again, this is predominantly for CDS instances. So we see here, this is a record from July that has become authorized now with the August submission for CDS. Awaiting authorization, also predominantly CDS. So that will be showing you the records that we're waiting for county service authorization for. And then this is a new tab. So this is that SE not authorized detail tab. This is the tab that's going to show you information about which children are not authorized for SE payment and give you different fields to try to determine why they may not be authorized. So again, these are the definitions here. If any one of those criteria are not met, then the SE payment will be not authorized automatically by CORE. So we have some examples here. CORE has automatically determined that for Jose, Ken, and Sarah, for all three of these children, they are not authorized for SE payment. The reason for Jose and Ken is that their date of birth was January 1st, 2018. So they had turned 3 before the monthly count date. So the monthly count date was September 1st, 2021. So they have already turned 3. That is why they are not authorized. And then for Sarah, we see there's 2 reasons why her SE payment is not authorized. And that is because they this child exited on September 1st, 2021. So they actually exited on the monthly count date. And because the SE enrollment verification is no. And remember, SE enrollment verification is asking you, is that client or the child still enrolled on the monthly count day? And so the answer is no, and they are not authorized. And then these are records from a prior submission in CORE that are also not authorized for the same reason that they are not authorized this month as well. I will say there are certain aspects of the SE kind of enrollment logic or reasons why a record may be authorized that CORE doesn't know about. And so those are changes that program staff and fiscal staff make in the system after you've submitted your data. So for example, CORE doesn't know if the child's IFSP date was entered into the ESIT DMS system by the 10th calendar day of the SC enrollment month. That's something that program staff will check as part of the billing review process. So if they find that rule has not been met, then they would manually go into the system and change those records back from authorized to not authorized or never authorized. And they would add a note in the system about why that record was changed so that you have that information here. If CORE is automatically determining that status based on information that it does have, like enrollment date, the date of birth, and exit date, or SC enrollment verification that you have entered on the reporting spreadsheets, and it's not going to give you a note. But if it's changed by program managers, again, because of data entered into the DMS, that information will appear in the notes column here. And then scrolling over here, you would see the dual allocation amount, the number of units, and the unit rate for that particular month for SC payments. The other new tab is that Never Authorized Detail tab. So this is where records that are given the final payment status of never authorized would appear. Probably not super common for ESIT beyond a few times a year, likely around the close of a state fiscal year, where any records that for the last state fiscal year were kind of hanging out in CORE as not authorized would be changed to never authorized. That way you don't have years and years of uploads continuing to be pulled into your invoice, and then knowing also that we do have to close out billing for fiscal years as soon as the fiscal year ends. So you would see those records populate here. Payment summarized by child was an existing field. This is just giving you a summary of what's being paid out this month and for what reporting periods for each of the children. So that has remained unchanged, other than, again, the addition of the definitions for SC payment authorization. And then this is the variance report. So this is another new tab for this invoice. And this is just integrating that variance report that used to be happening outside of CORE now into your CORE invoice. And so this is going to show any records that, again, your DDEX program manager or fiscal staff have manually changed in the system. So you may see this often with SE payments. You could see it in other instances too. We just have a kind of random example in here now just for the purposes of showing you all, but basically it will start with the date and then explain the amount that was either added or removed from the invoice and the reasons why that change was made, so that you can see in your variance report what the authorized payment is now, if there is an authorized payment, and what the change was. So did they increase the payment, decrease the payment, remove the payment, and what were the reasons behind that? And then the final tab on your invoice is just the raw data. So this is all of the data that is used to create all the pivot tables and all the other tabs, just so that you have access to it and can analyze that data in other ways if you'd like to. But for the most part, that is your new invoice. And I think that's all we have to cover today.
Thank you so much, Elena.